Hey everyone, welcome to the Explainer. So, have you ever actually stopped to wonder how your brain takes in this incredibly chaotic world around us and somehow instantly makes sense of the whole thing? It's kind of like magic. Well, today we're literally diving into the blueprint of the mind, the Gestalt laws of learning. We're going to see how our brain's natural visual shortcuts, the way we just automatically organize what we see, are absolutely crucial. They're actually the very foundation of how we learn and understand everything around us.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The unified whole. 2. 4 laws of perception. And 3. Implications for education. And it's kind of funny, just by showing you this agenda right up front, we're actually already doing a Gestalt thing. We're giving you the complete whole picture before we zoom into the specific parts.
Right, moving on to section 1, the unified whole. This sets up the core philosophy of our cognitive blueprint. But before we get into the actual visual mechanics of it all, I've got to ask you a huge question. How does human learning actually happen? Really think about it for a second. Is it just us stubbornly memorizing isolated facts, kind of like a computer blindly storing data? Or is there something much more holistic, much more organized happening behind the scenes in our minds? Well, that brings us right to Gestalt theory. To put it simply, learning takes place when the learner organizes separate parts, or stimuli, into a unified and meaningful whole. This is a massive, and I mean massive, radical shift away from rote memorization. It basically tells us that our brains aren't just filing cabinets. They are constantly, actively searching for unified meaning in everything we encounter.
Section 2, 4 laws of perception. Now we're going to look at the 4 specific rules that govern exactly how our brains pull off creating these unified wholes.
So, the very first rule in this cognitive blueprint is the law of similarity. This law states that elements of a stimulus configuration are going to be grouped together perceptually if they're similar to each other in shape, size, or color. Simply put, our brains automatically seek out patterns based on likeness. We are completely hardwired to group things together that look the same. Now, what's truly fascinating here is how your brain just did the heavy lifting without you even asking it to. When you look at this field of letters, your mind instantly groups the similar shapes, right? You automatically see the O's forming a distinct line right down the middle of the X's. Literally zero conscious effort required. It just happens. Next up, we've got the law of proximity. This one states that elements nearer to each other are perceived as part of the same configuration. So while that first law was all about things looking similar, this one is entirely about physical closeness. To our brains, physical closeness strongly implies a mental grouping. Just look at these vertical lines here. You don't just see 9 isolated random lines, do you? No way. Your spatial proximity filter immediately kicks in. Because of how they're spaced out, you inevitably perceive them as 3 distinct sets. Closeness instantly creates a group in your mind's eye. Moving right along to the third rule, the law of closure. We tend to close the open edges of a figure to make the stimulus configuration complete. Basically, our brains have this incredibly strong inherent preference for enclosed, complete figures over open, fragmented ones. We naturally just want to finish the unfinished shape. Notice what your own mind is actively doing right now as you look at this. Technically, this shape is just an ellipse with some small gaps in it. It's broken. But your mind is actively bridging those gaps to let you perceive a complete circle. Your brain prefers the whole so much that it simply invents the missing parts for you. How cool is that? And that brings us to our final rule, the law of continuity. This dictates that individual elements are linked to form a smoothly flowing, continuous pattern that actually makes sense to us. We just have a deep psychological preference for uninterrupted paths. We'd much rather see a continuous flow than some disjointed or disrupted form. When you look at these lines, your mind naturally just follows the smooth, continuous rings. You see separate, concentric ellipses. You definitely don't see a disrupted spiral or just disconnected random arcs. We instinctively link individual elements into sensible, flowing patterns whenever we possibly can. All right, let's do a really quick recap of the 4 laws to make sure you've grasped this complete whole before we move on. Similarity groups like items, like our O's and X's. Proximity groups nearby items, like those sets of lines. Closure mentally completes open figures, filling in that broken circle. And continuity links elements into smooth patterns, giving us those concentric rings. Okay, now that we have the whole picture, let's look at how we can apply these visual rules to education. Section 3. Implications for education.
Let's bridge the gap between visual perception and classroom learning. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive, gaping contrast between outdated teaching methods and the Gestalt approach. On the left, we've got mechanical repetition. That's just the blind processing of isolated facts, which, let's be honest, is basically useless for any kind of higher-level learning. But on the right, the integrated approach. This aims for deep understanding, placing topics into a meaningful whole, and actually achieving genuine insight. It perfectly aligns with how our brains naturally want to work. Let's move to the practical side and see how this builds a framework for educators. If you want to create a true Gestalt learning environment, you've got to take these problem-solving steps. Step 1. Arouse curiosity and motivation. Make them care. Step 2. Exercise observation and thinking. Don't just stand there and lecture at them. Let them use their own minds. And step 3. Place students in the position of discoverers. They need to actively connect the dots themselves to actually see that big picture.
So the crucial point here is perfectly captured in this absolute classic quote. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Teaching must always proceed from the whole to the part. I want to leave you with one final provocative question as we wrap up this explainer. Think about your own learning habits, or even just how you communicate information to other people. Are you just collecting and handing out isolated pieces of information, hoping they eventually kind of make sense? Or are you actively taking a step back, looking for the patterns and revealing the unified whole?